This conference will now be recorded.
Feels like it.
Jeff Eagle. I am the co-chair of the MC for the work, and we'll go around and do introductions. Marcus.
Hi, I'm Marcus Beck, program science with Astor. Deputy Division Director with DEP, the Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration.
Ashley Painter, City of Baltimore, Environmental Management.
John Stanley, City of St. Petersburg, Environmental Compliance Division.
Green, Hillsborough County, Water Resources Department.
David Clifford, Hillsborough County.
Sarah Malone, City of Lakeland Water Utilities.
Jeff Dalton, City of Tampa.
John Levin, Pinellas County Utilities.
Idiot like Monica Kennedy.
Steve Bola, Hillsborough County Extension.
Brett Urson, Environmental Protection Commission, Water Division.
Aaron Wishing, Kinder Morgan. Mike Lane, City of Clearwater.
Harry Birchfield as FWC harmful algal blooms. Sarah Kaminsky, FWC harmful algal blooms.
Heather Montier with the City of Tampa.
John Lake, City of Pines.
Pinellas County Environmental Management. Alana Todd, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
Maya Burke, Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
And Ed Sherwood, Tampa Bay Estuary Program. Is there anyone online that wants to announce themselves?
Hi, Chris Pratt. I've had to call in. I couldn't get it through the GoToMeeting app. Can you hear me?
People online?
Sure.
I'm going to call out the people online. If you want to unmute your mics and then introduce yourselves, I'll go in the order that's on the GoToMeeting that's being shown. Alex Manos? Astrid Flores Thibaud?
Hi, how are you? DB.
Oh, sorry, you guys' audio is not coming through. We also have Blake Simmons from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program that's online. Give us just a second, we're going to adjust the audio output. Blake, can you go ahead and speak?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hey everyone, Blake Simmons, environmental social scientist for Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
I'm going to start at the beginning too. Alex Manos, if you want to introduce yourself again, we have the audio in the room now.
Hi, I'm Alex Manos with Pinellas County Division of Environmental Management.
Astrid Flores, Thibaud?
Astrid Flores from the Department of Environmental Protection. Water facility?
Chris Anastasio?
Hey everybody, Chris Anastasio, SwiftMud. Sorry, I couldn't make it there in person.
Dave Carlin?
Hi, Dave Carlin, Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Emma Dantas?
Hi all, this is Emma Dantas with Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Erica Peck?
Hello, Erica Peck with the DEP.
Felicia Burks?
Hi, Felicia Burks, EPA, Atlanta, Georgia.
Greg Nuth?
Hello everyone, Greg North with Polk County Water Resources.
Heather Bryan.
There it is. Hi, I'm Heather Bryan and with Sarasota County Stormwater.
Jennifer Piacente.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Piacente with DEP, Division of Environmental Assessment and Restoration.
Nicole Padron.
Hi, Nicole Bedron with Zero Parks and Entertainment.
Nicole Thomas.
Hello, Nicole Thomas with Tampa Bay Water.
Ray Pribble.
Ray Preble, Witchiniki Environmental.
Ryan Ryzik.
Ryan Resnick, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Tony Janicki.
Yes, this is Tony Janicki at Janicki Environmental.
Vivian Gleaves.
Hi, it's Vivian Gleaves, City of Largo, Environmental Services.
And I see there's actually a caller on the phone that says caller 02. Can you announce yourself if you're just on the phone?
Yes, this is Chris Pratt with EPC. Can you hear me yet?
Hey, Chris. Yes. And there's actually
Okay.
another
Thank you.
caller 04.
Once again, welcome to the February 22nd NMC meeting. We got a pretty full agenda. And we're fortunate enough to have people who actually travel down to the Tampa Bay area to talk to us about the FDP response to the 2022 RI plan updates. Thank you,
Thank you. This will be brief, and thanks for putting the letter up there. I will not read it, but I'm really here to just quickly summarize what we said in this letter, what we decided, or our response back on the Tampa Bay Estuary, or the Tampa Bay Reasonable Assurance Plan 2022 5-year update. And overall, we were very supportive of this effort. And really, DEP, my group, commends Tampa Bay Estuary Program and the Nitrogen Management Consortium for continuing these efforts. You know, it's been very successful over the years, and we hold this up as a model. Right now, I have at least 2 other groups that are looking at reasonable assurance plans, 4 groups beyond that may be considering reasonable assurance plans. And whenever they come talk to us, we say, go talk to Ed, or go talk to other folks. This is really the model. This is the gold standard of what a reasonable assurance plan should look like. It's been very successful. It's been a good collaboration, and so we really support it. And when I said that, we support the findings of the 2020 update. I think it was well substantiated by the documentation provided in the document. And so we accepted that, we approved it, sent it off to EPA. What that means for DEP's process, because this kind of relates to our impaired waters rule assessment, what'll happen in our next assessment, our next biennial assessment that'll be completed in 2024, you'll see a draft assessment sometime around July of this year. And what we'll likely see is most of the segments in Tampa Bay will go into what we call category 2A. And that's just an assessment category. Category 2 means the water body is attaining standards for that parameter. So in this case, it would be nitrogen or chlorophyll. And then the B part just indicates that there's an ongoing restoration effort, restoration plan, in this case, the reasonable assurance plan, to ensure that we continue to protect that water body. Other water bodies or other parameters may be kept in what we call category 4B. Category 4B means that the water body is not attaining standards. And the best example for this would be Old Tampa Bay chlorophyll, where we're not currently attaining the criteria or the target. The criteria for chlorophyll in the state of Florida and Tampa Bay is the same as the RAP target. We kind of made those the same thing when we set numeric nutrient criteria. So 4B will just document that it's not currently attaining that standard, but that there are ongoing restoration activities that DEP believes will lead to restoration, will lead to attaining that standard. So ultimately, we wouldn't do a TMDL. We would just keep in that category 4B and really look at, and the other part that we really liked and appreciated and thought was right is we had a lot of interest knowing that Old Tampa Bay is not currently meeting the chlorophyll targets. There's been seagrass losses. There's been some pyridinium blooms. The corrective actions that were provided in the RAP, we think those are sufficient and reasonable and will likely lead to restoration within maybe a 5-year time frame, hopefully, of Old Tampa Bay or a little longer. But we, really support those. And so kind of finally, what we said is we want to stay engaged in this effort, especially as those corrective actions, corrective actions are implemented and developed. DEP wants to make sure we stay engaged, and we've asked the estuary program and nitrogen management consortium to just kind of periodically keep us updated on the status, so that we can provide feedback and kind of work through this process cooperatively, as worked so well over all these years. I or some of my staff will make sure we continue to participate in these meetings, if not remotely, maybe in person, just so we can stay engaged on that and continue that productive relationship. So that's it, unless folks had questions on our findings or anything else. Thank you.
Moving on to item number 3, that's going to give us the 2027 regional insurance update, and remind you to make some motions.
You guys need some coffee to wake up this afternoon. There's plenty of coffee in the back, but on the heels of turning in the 2020 reasonable assurance update and everything that Ken just went over, we wanted to provide this first meeting for the next reasonable assurance plan implementation period to kind of set the stage of what we feel are the activities necessary to get the bay back on track. As you heard, and as we reported, Old Tampa Bay and other factors in the upper bay are not good in terms of seagrass losses. So we thought it was ideal at this point to kind of recommit to our efforts as the consortium, the partnership that has endured now for, I think this is going to be the 6th RA cycle that we've pursued, going back all the way to 2002 was the first one. So, there's a long history and legacy of working together in the Tampa Bay region, as Ken highlighted, and we want to continue that into the future. It's going to take all of us working together again to get the bay back on track. The nitrogen load management targets that were developed in the early 1990s, that seems like in Old Tampa Bay, there are some things that we can solve through an additional some of the capacity assessment, and that's, I think, going to set the stage for some of the early work at the beginning of this next 2022 through 2026 implementation period. So I put this slide up here just to give that context, is that we've been meeting as a group since the mid-1990s. It's viewed as a successful collaboration, and we want to continue that moving forward. We don't want to lose that momentum and effort, especially in light of some of the recent ecological conditions in the bay. So just another reminder, and I know a lot of you have been through this process, but there are some newer faces in the consortium. The dynamic of the consortium shifted around the 2009-2010 time period when we developed allocations around the EPA adopted TMDL and the loading management targets that were developed by the consortium in the mid-1990s. So every source of nitrogen loads to the bay is fully allocated at this point to each of the bay segments. And that paradigm has worked for a long part of our history. Like I said, we saw recovery seagrasses back to those peak 2016 conditions around this premise. If we continue to reduce loads to the bay, water clarity will improve and we'll get seagrasses back. And that model did work. The 2022 submittal sort of entered in a new era, I think, of what the bay's response has been, though. And that's really, the efforts moving forward of what we need to do over the next 5 years to get back those seagrasses, to ensure that we have water quality supportive of seagrass recovery in the bay moving forward. So I appreciate Ken's comments and support through the DEP in ensuring that this is still a valid process for the region. We just need to, kind of think about how we move forward, particularly in the Old Tampa Bay segment, because that's really what's driving a lot of the losses lately. The graphic on the right is water quality conditions in each of the major bay segments recognized in the reasonable assurance plan. So it goes from Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, and the remainder of Lower Tampa Bay, which is the group of minor bay segments that includes Boca Ciega Bay South, Teresita Bay, and the Manatee River. And for the most part, chlorophyll A conditions are met in the majority of the bay segments, except for in Old Tampa Bay, as has been reported in the past to the consortium. Also, during the time where we've been failing to meet those chlorophyll A conditions in the bay, we saw substantial losses of seagrasses. This was just reported earlier in the month by the Water Management District that just finalized their seagrass coverage estimates for Southwest Florida. So from 2016 to 2022, we've lost 11,500 acres of seagrasses baywide. That's a significant amount of seagrass loss in the bay. And that's alarming to me. This should be alarming to you all as part of this process to manage water quality resources for the benefit of the bay's ecology. We really need to kind of identify what are the needed steps moving forward to reverse that trend. And right now, we're still on a negative trend. The past 3 assessment periods have been losses, and that's unprecedented over the history of reporting seagrass coverage in Tampa Bay. We only had one sort of period of time in 1998 related to an El Nino event where we saw a dip in the historic estimates for seagrass. But for the period of 2016 to 2022, we've seen consistent loss, like I said, to the tune of over 11,000 acres. And we're starting to break down and try to understand where those losses are occurring. We've been reporting in the past, the conditions in Old Tampa Bay, and that's certainly where we've seen the most seagrass loss baywide. I forget the number now. I got too many numbers in my head, but acreage-wise, that has been the loss in terms of the most loss in terms of seagrass coverage in the bay. There's also been substantial losses in Hillsborough Bay, and just want to make note the scales on the y-axis are different for each of the bay segments. So although Hillsborough Bay shows a big loss, the total amount of acreage is still around like 400, 500 acres relative to about 5,000 acres now in Old Tampa Bay segment. So those upper bay segments, the middle portion, Middle Tampa Bay, the upper portion of Middle Tampa Bay, as well as Hillsborough Bay and Old Tampa Bay is where we've seen the most seagrass losses. The lower part of the bay are fairly stable. There have been some declines in Teresita Bay and the Manatee River. But if you take a look at that bright red line, that's basically extrapolating the 40,000 acre bay-wide seagrass coverage to each of the bay segments based on historic conditions and what we would expect to occur in terms of the amount of seagrasses that would make up that 40,000 acre goal. So, nutshell, Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and to a certain extent, Middle Tampa Bay is where we've seen the most declines in seagrass coverage. Again, those upper bay segments. So, the question becomes, what we do about it. And what we've reported on, what this group has been working on is continue to try to ratchet down nutrient loads into the Tampa Bay estuary. And we've had a fair amount of success. Our benchmark now is the total amount of nutrient loads going into the bay relative to the total hydrologic load. That's what those dotted lines represent for each of the bay segments. Those are the adopted, in this case, total nitrogen delivery ratios, or how much nitrogen load per unit of water is allowable to continue to maintain water quality. So, based on those what I just showed you in seagrasses and in terms of meeting chlorophyll A targets in Old Tampa Bay, there's now a disconnect in terms of meeting these loading targets. There's something else occurring, or there's other confounding factors that are controlling the expression of nutrients, particularly in the Old Tampa Bay segment, that this paradigm isn't really making sense in Old Tampa Bay. And now we're seeing sort of those losses systemically in the bay in terms of seagrasses. So not to say that a different nutrient loading target is needed. That might be the case for Old Tampa Bay. That's part of the work that I think that we need to do over the next, at least this next 2 years, to identify how much nutrient loads are realistic and attainable, as well as other complementary activities that might help the expression of nutrients moving forward in those upper bay segments. So that, again, we have water clarity and water conditions conducive for continued seagrass recovery. So, this slide is just to show that, it's gotten more complicated. The paradigms we developed in the mid 1990s, got us to this point, got us to those peak 2016 seagrass conditions. Now there's these other confounding factors that we're having to contend with, and it's probably going to take more than one strategy to get us back on track. And that's what this graphic is trying to represent. We know based on prior reporting of bay conditions that there's other controlling factors, particularly in Old Tampa Bay, that we're observing. There could be increasing temperatures. There's potentially more higher sustained hydrologic loads over the past decade going into the bay than what we've experienced in the prior 2 decades. We know that circulation has a profound effect on residence times and how algal blooms occur in the Old Tampa Bay segment. And with these recent seagrass losses, there's this also nutrient cycling issue that's going on in the bay that we think is being manifested not only in phytoplankton or algae in the water column, but we're also seeing a lot more macroalgae throughout the bay as well. So that's a confounding source of internal nutrients that we're going to have to deal with and have to manage moving forward. And as I mentioned, it's going to take multiple interventions probably to get the bay back on track. It's not going to be any one specific actions. It's going to be all of us working together towards the collective benefit of the bay. And what we tried to do and try to think about, and this was actually a suggestion made by Tino Provenzano, the NMC co-chair representing the industries at our management board meeting. He was asking for some sort of request from the estuary program to industries to help in this effort to get the bay back on track. And in the past, through the reasonable assurance updates, we've been able to foster what's called declarations of cooperation in the past. So the very first RA plan developed in 2002, as well as the 2007 reasonable assurance update, which committed us to start developing allocations. We use this instrument called the Declaration of Cooperation to make sure everyone's on the same page, is an agreement that work needs to be done, and we're committed to doing this work together. And that's what we're trying to foster for this next 2027 reasonable assurance plan update. So there's a link within the agenda to the full declaration. Basically, what it boils down to is there's a certain section that sort of pledges and recommits the consortium participants to cooperating in this endeavor that we're talking about over the next 5 years. Those steps that I'm breaking out and suggesting, offering for your all's feedback as a rational approach, is taking it sort of in stages. So what I'm suggesting for the first 2 years is developing a 2024 reasonable assurance addendum, which basically is reinvestigating the Old Tampa Bay segment, whether or not the nutrient budget, the diet for Old Tampa Bay needs to be updated. If there's other benchmarks that we need to look at to ensure water quality is sufficient for continued seagrass recovery in that bay segment. We're proposing to do that as part of that addendum that would be folded into the broader 2027 reasonable assurance update, which we'd submit again to DEP at the end of the 5-year implementation period. That'd be due to DEP on December 31st, 2027. So that kind of highlights the first couple of sections. The last sections is, as we've done in the past, because this is a collaborative process, we've also asked for the consortium participants to pledge their support through financial contributions that will help develop that documentation. The last funding agreement and decision memo that we developed was on the tail end of the 2010 allocations and QBEL that was passed by DEP. That funding level has pretty much stayed the same. I think it was 65 or 6,000 for each entity that had an allocation greater than 1 ton, and it was $500 recommended contribution to the consortium for those entities with an allocation less than 1 ton. And that, again, helped us support development of this documentation through a technical support contract that we help facilitate through the estuary program. So in this document, what I'm suggesting is that the contribution go up slightly. Inflation, everybody's experiencing inflationary costs. So I'm hoping that there's some agreement that the cost that we're asking for each entity this round and commitments is palatable. We're asking for $7,500 for each entity that has greater than 1 ton of an allocation, and $750 for those entities with less than a 1 ton allocation to help support the development of this documentation. There's some times that we ask for those contributions to be submitted to the program so that we have some assurance that we could go out for a request for proposal for this technical support contract that we're envisioning for both these documentation steps. And just to kind of give you a brain dump of what we've been thinking about, that reasonable assurance addendum is we'll call it an Old Tampa Bay civil capacity assessment. But basically that's looking at the paradigm, whether or not it still makes sense for Old Tampa Bay. My sense is from some of the initial information we've been able to develop as a program and some of the work, particularly with like Roger Johansson has done some bioptical work for us. I'm not sure that the majority of Old Tampa Bay seagrasses are light limited. There's other confounding factors that are controlling the recovery of those seagrasses and potential stressors. We know that we have had persistent pyridinium blooms within that Old Tampa Bay segment, and how much is that is playing a role in terms of a sustained seagrass recovery effort in that bay segment. So all that being said, there might be a new benchmark we need to develop based on the current ecology and the conditions being expressed in Old Tampa Bay. We've also had some conversations about whether or not total nitrogen or some other finer scale nitrogen species might be the most appropriate management target in that bay segment moving forward, whether it relates to trying to control dissolved inorganic nitrogen sources from stormwater or other organic nitrogen sources that might be exacerbating some of the algal blooms. So that assessment report will kind of tease out what the potential targets moving forward should be for that bay segment to make sure water quality conditions are conducive, and whether or not we need to reestablish any science-based thresholds and new allocations based on that new assessment would come out of that report. So that would basically, if it's necessary, if the diet needs to be something different than what the EPA TMDL that was adopted back in 1998 should be, which is 486 tons of nitrogen per year. We're now more or less hovering around that point in terms of total nitrogen loads. Whether or not that needs to be adjusted in the future to get that bay segment back on track, I think that will all come out during this assimilative capacity assessment. And that might require potential adjustments to those entities that have allocations within the Old Tampa Bay segment. What we're proposing is to go out for an RFP as quickly as possible to do this work, because we know this is the necessary next steps. We're trying to think about getting an RFP out by the summer of 2023, and then hopefully get a contract in place as quickly as possible, either the fall or later this year, and then completely complete this assessment by the tail end of 2024. So about, depending on when we get a contract in hand, about 1.5 years worth of work. And that's going to be fairly aggressive time schedule, but that's, I think, what we need to try to get accomplished to move forward on significant actions that will have a benefit for Old Tampa Bay. More broadly, we know we will have to submit a 5-year report to DEP that covers the 2022 to 2026 implementation period. So that will necessitate developing documentation on water quality conditions, loadings, and how allocations in the other bay segments are being attained for all the other bay segments represented in the reasonable assurance plan. So we don't want to ignore the other work that's needed bay-wide. We want to continue to have commitments from the consortium to make sure that we maintain water quality to support seagrass and those other bay segments as well. So that will be additional work. Like I said, that will be part of our traditional work that we've done through the Nitrogen Management Consortium, and that will take some funding to support development of that documentation. And these are the 5 traditional things that we've included in the reasonable assurance updates, and they're basically what was in the 2020 update that we submitted to DEP this past December. So That first bullet is relating to, folding in the outcomes of the addendum from Old Tampa Bay into this larger 2027 RA update. But then there's also some other questions that we had as a consortium prior to some of the things that, came up in terms of water quality conditions on Old Tampa Bay. There are still some potential adjustments we were considering as a consortium, and that was just changes from land use or just jurisdictional boundaries that might necessitate adjustment to allocations that have been previously developed. Going back to 2009 was the last time we developed those allocations. And then we know, the region continues to grow. The population is increasing substantially. That's putting pressure on you all as both wastewater and stormwater facility operators. And how we manage nutrient loads moving forward might need some adjustments over what was developed in the past. So again, those were sort of conversations we've had as a consortium, and they've kind of been on the back burner because of the pressing issues in Old Tampa Bay. But there's still sort of topics that we need to kind of move through over this next RA implementation period, and really for the long-term management of the Bay itself. So, these are conversations we need to have and come to some resolution on moving forward. So those I think will make up the brunt of the activities that we would suggest for the consortium. Just to give you a little status update, currently Janicki Environmental was the NMC technical support contract for the last reasonable assurance plan that we submitted to DEP. That contract is basically closing out at the end of March, and what we'll need is new commitments moving forward to develop both that 2024 addendum and the full 2027 RA update. I kind of outlined some schedules of what we're thinking about in the SRA program in terms of laying out that work towards the tail end of this summer. And then as we receive funding commitments from the consortium, reinitiating a new master contract for the 2027 RA update, probably sometime next year. If we get sort of solid commitments for funding from the consortium, we might be able to do that sooner, but based on the timelines I specified in the declaration, that this staging of work seemed to make sense to us. So bottom lines. So this is what we're thinking in terms of funding that work. For the 2024 Old Tampa Bay Similar Capacity Assessment, we're estimating about $245,000 to complete that just for the Old Tampa Bay segment. The larger reasonable assurance update would be probably about $250,000. Our prior contract with Janicki was for $160,000. So again, inflation, we're kind of trying to budget in a little bit higher cost that we're expecting for this round. So in total, about $500,000 worth of work. As I mentioned in the declaration, we outlined a different funding contribution than what has been agreed upon in the past. That link, that update to the decision memo 25, that's the last time we decided as a body in terms of funding levels. That was decision memo 25 outlined a $6,000 contribution and a $500 contribution for entities with greater than or less than a ton of allocation. That hasn't changed since, as I mentioned, 2010. So even with that slight increase, it still puts us a little bit below of what we anticipate as a sort of a funding target. But we as an SRA program have committed to funding some portions of this work. So the 2024 addendum, that Old Tampa Bay Civil Capacity Assessment, we have existing funds in a current work plan, and my policy board at last Friday's meeting conceptually approved additional funding to support this work that would become available on October 1, 2024. To the tune of $115,000. So in total, we think as an SRA program, we could probably support that addendum document, or preparation of that addendum document. So the shortfall really is with the larger 2027 RA update and commitments by the consortium to help fund that. Again, through existing work plan funds, we have about $50,000 earmarked for development of that update. And that will leave, based on our estimates, about $200,000 of a shortfall of funding to see that document development through. So based on the recommended contributions of $77,500 and $750, if we get about 27 entities contributing that amount, we should be able to make up the shortfall. And I think in the prior round, I think we got somewhere around 25 or 26 entities contributing to the reasonable assurance plan development. So that should be attainable moving forward. And hopefully that will give us some assurance on these things in terms of financial commitments that we could then go out in terms of developing an RFP. So all this is new to the consortium, I know. So what I'm proposing is sort of these actions to consider for you guys to potentially take a vote on. The first one is basically, does that make sense to y'all in terms of the work that I outlined, developing that 2024 RA addendum centered around Old Tampa Bay, and then ultimately folding in that work in the broader 2027 RA update 5 years, less than 5 years from now. To accomplish that work, are the funding levels palatable based on what I'm proposing? This is what I'm recommending. The consortium will have to, provide their feedback whether or not they think that it's a rational approach. And then the last bullet is, do you all feel that we need a formal declaration of cooperation that we've developed? It's linked in the agenda, and each of our entities representing the consortium signing on to that declaration of cooperation moving forward and getting your approval from your appropriate approving authority for each of your entities. Again, this has been a valuable instrument, I think, in the past, just to keep, this collaboration and momentum that we've been able to achieve over the past 30 years moving forward. And I think it's a good one moving forward. It also gives us assurance that you're pledging those potential contributions to support the development of the RA update in a more formal fashion than just verbal commitments or votes to the consortium. So I pose those 3 action items for your all's consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, or if you wanted to go through the declaration, I could also bring that up. And if there's any wordsmithing that you all are suggesting, we could work through that as a body as well. I'll stop there. Anyone have any questions in the room or online? Yeah, so in the declaration, we say by October 31st of next year, 2024, but the latest. Sooner the better. But if we had a signed declaration saying that you're committing that fund, but you can't provide it to us, then that gives us more assurance to potentially use that fund and use those funds in an RFP announcement. Yeah. Yep, we'll do that upon request.
Once we have a commitment to funding level,
yeah,
we'll be able to turn around the invoices quickly.
Anyone else? Anybody on the phone?
Anybody online have a question?
Well, I will throw one out there.
Yep.
Sorry.
No?
I happen to know based on my 3 years, we need a more robust evaluation of what we can pay from the perspective. If we think we can solve Old Tampa Bay water quality reductions, we might as well take every last bit in stormwater and from the point of discharges out, because the atmospheric deposition alone is enough to put it over the top. I've looked at these numbers, I've read marine reports work, there's no way around it. It's a sink sometimes, and sometimes it's not a sink, but overall, it got a net influx because of the 3 land bridges that we have there. We can't speak specifically to that with the model we have. We just can't. Our resolution and our existing model is great for the other 3 bay segments from that perspective, but it doesn't allow us to see what's really going on in Old Tampa Bay from a hydraulic resonance time perspective. What ends up in our soil when it gets, you know, we utilize subsequently in subsequent seasons, we just can't see that. We don't know what that is. But that, we may be low on our cost. I guess what I'm going for, because in the absence of that, I don't think you find a solution. You still may be, I've thought all along that they have been artificially low. Make no secret about that. I've also sort of thought some of the other ones may be not low, as low as they could be. They could actually be higher from their HRT. But we can't tell that. We have a resolution to see that. I don't think it's calculated in that aspect of the evaluation. I mean, got blindsided by DOT, and they basically said it doesn't help with their model. And, I do feel that way. I feel like we got blindsided by them. $100 million project, and they wouldn't $30 million cut. That's out of the house planning space. And we know that when we put the cut in on the east side of Rocky Creek, we've seen nothing but positive gains up there. So this notion that somehow these three acreages are not going to be higher in the whole together, just not paying attention, guys. The only one that they say in the past. That would not be what I would want to see. You have to do it for the whole bay, but you got to do it for that bay segment. Otherwise, you just fail on it.
Yeah, and sort of two responses to that. I don't disagree with what you're saying. The fourth bullet down is trying to get at that point. We recognize that there are ongoing activities of the consortium participants right now in those bay segments. We know we are also planning for additional work in terms of stormwater controls, investigating stormwater controls in the Old Tampa Bay segment. So we want to fold that into the assessment to a certain extent of understanding all the planned activities and then what additional things need to be done to improve water quality and seagrass conditions. And it might take a hydrodynamic model. What is also in the declaration is, we as an SU program are committing, funding up to the tune of $245,000 for that initial assessment. But if this other work is necessary and it goes beyond the scope of that, what's also in the declaration is it states something to the effect that the consortium pledges to find a rational and reasonable approach for funding those potential additional components if necessitated by this extra work. So we're not specifying what that cost might be or what it is at this point, but we're asking for the consortium participants to take that pledge that they understand that the costs that I outlined are probably minimal in terms of understanding what needs to be done in Old Tampa Bay, and there might be some additional work that needs funding that the consortium participant need to come up with an equitable approach to fund that moving forward as well. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is honestly, guys, $7,500 is bargain basement. You're getting the best deal you can possibly imagine. And it's through the consortium that we get that deal, right? And if that dollar amount needs to go up to support the development of the purchase, because a couple of hydrologic models that are well vetted, probably the purchase, not the development of, I gotta tell you, I couldn't find a better way to spend some of the county's money. The notion that I'm gonna reduce my loading for anything short of tens of millions is, and I think that goes for many of the POTWs that have once recharges over here. And we just want to invest in both, and replace it with 5 minutes for us to discharge. I think anybody who's got a call, they say this model at least helps us understand if we pursue a model with water quality attachment, it will at least allow us to understand what further reductions would actually need, if anything. I'm hopeful on that issue. And I've been doing this, like I said, it's like 2000, so I've been involved and watching. The other ones, personally, with the Bay and Hillsborough Bay, ship traffic and size of that ship traffic and the impacts associated with wave runoff. Towards our shores, on both the west and the east side, the missing. It wasn't pretty far back in time, some longshore bars over there that might help that. I think that the increased ship traffic we've seen in those bay segments, other bay segments, and the size of some of those ships, which sort of maxed out on that end, is caused a serious wave runoff issue for some coastline and the coastline in that area. I think we're going to with that as well. And we're very happy to do some kind of onshore action in those two base segments as well. If you want that so I don't like for the area issue, water quality issue. But that's one thing that's definitely changed there since we started, since I first started getting involved in the
Yeah, just the section 8 is where that language is in the declaration. If additional consortium participants pledge to develop funding strategy to complete its development. That's referring to the 2024 addendum. And then also, just to address the points you just made, Carrie Lopez with FWI is going to be talking about some updates to the modeling tool that we've been able to develop with the help of Janicki Environmental, and additional research questions that could be developed through exercising that updated model moving forward. And they relate to the causeway alterations that we've been proposing, but also taking into potentially taking into consideration these other management activities that we know that the consortium participants are obligating themselves moving forward in terms of their either addressing Senate Bill 64 or the additional stormwater control work that we're proposing up in Old Tampa Bay.
discussion.
And can you expand on your use of the term equitable and what that might?
Yeah, I think that is TBD, right? So we formulated a working group just with Old Tampa Bay entities that have an allocation, and whether or not they would be the ones to foot the additional funding, I'm not sure. And, we've in the past collectively looked at the issues of water quality bay-wide, and I've committed to funding it equitably in that fashion towards the development of those regional assurance plans. The Old Tampa Bay segment is different, and the issues that we're experiencing in it is different now. So I'm not defining what that equitable is at this point.
Made everybody solve it. That's obviously not what happened moving forward. So I would have an expectation that burden would be spread across the group. There is a tech memo that allows, I believe, grading, right? Where there?
Within the base segments.
Tech memo. So you could potentially buy your credit back from somebody else who is getting additional. We expect to be in the Northwest, we expect to be close to zero of our wastewater plants on Senate Bill 64. So what whether charges, but if we minimal benefit for what we reduce that by about 6 months a year. Similarly, I've not looked at everybody's Senate Bill 64 plans, but I have to figure we're not all that far off. That's 2032.
Right. Right.
Right.
Good.
2031. January 1st, 2032. Not an extra year.
So do y'all need more time to consider this formally through the consortium, or do you think we can have a vote for these items? I think the first one's kind of easy if you guys agree with that process, develop those two different documentation. The second and third one might be more difficult based on you guys seeing this for the first time probably today. But I'd be happy to entertain any options that the consortium wishes to move forward on. We'd basically be looking for a motion for consensus approval of these all three, or one or multiple at a time.
And if you're not comfortable, you need to tell us
Yes.
why and what support you need to get to a point where you could make a decision.
No, I was gonna say, I agree with the approach. Really, especially looking at that over a 5-year period.
Yeah, it was 07 developed the route. And then once the allocations were developed, there was a signed declaration committing to those allocations at around 2009, 2010 time period. It's been a while.
Something like that. Operations pretty straightforward. That, so I don't even know what needs to be true. Obviously, we said that already, and so the two we got to do it. It's fine, a reasonable sheriff's document. I'll it's a different issue. It's necessary, but it's not necessary. It's explicit.
Joe had a question.
Yeah, I would value that we will, provided that we can still discuss what's actually included in that declaration, that way we have a power. Because this is hard, and it says, submit a signed declaration. Yes, I think that's a great idea, and I would do that. Again, just what's in that declaration, not second. We did round around a little bit after 07.
If we give a time certain for comments back to us.
Yeah, some of them.
Okay. How about end of March as a deadline? Would that work? I think the next meeting would be May. Then
That's what I'm proposing, but what as frequently as y'all need, that's.
so we get
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the agenda. It's linked in this presentation. If you click on this.
If you go to the tbet.org calendar and you go to the meeting materials, it's included in that Google Drive folder.
It's a Google Doc, so if you're comfortable submitting comments that way, and I'll show you guys how to do it if I get out of full screen. So once you open up the Google Doc, if you do the drop down to suggesting, that's almost like track changes in Word, and add your comments that way, that would be helpful.
Expect the more lawyers that we get involved, the more you might want to just download the Word version and provide. That way. But if you have like simple kind of,
Yeah.
you know, changes to the narrative, that's fine.
So just to, while I have it up, just to kind of give you an overview of what it is, you know, the first section is basically kind of outlining the history of why, you know, we started meeting as a consortium. And really what I just showed you during my slides is this section of what the pledge, what you're pledging to as a consortium participant, and that's outlined in those 8 sections. Basically the developing an addendum, the full 2027 RA update, continuing to commit to, you know, working towards the collaborative benefit of improving the Tampa Bay estuary, as well as the funding levels I just mentioned. So that's, if the funding levels change or other sort of things change, then we probably have to act again as a consortium to accept it.
Has this in the past been signed by whoever has the?
Consortium signed.
Yeah. It depends on the entity and who you think is the approving authority. So private industry, it's usually, it could be a president, CEO, it could be a regional director. And we've gotten the Board of County Commissioners to sign the pass for other entities. We recognize that will probably take some time to get approved as well. So that's, you're pushing out sort of the funding commitments to October of next year, recognizing that might take some time to get a fully signed declaration. There's the example signature page. And that basically is the body of the declaration. That's basically 4 pages. And then there's exhibits that give you a little bit more elaborate history. And then exhibit B is basically the 2020 RA update that kind of calls for the need for this additional work in Tampa Bay. Yeah.
Based on what we wanted to do, we were going to read each.
It'd be, yeah, Hillsborough County as one entity as expressed in the allocation table. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, the calculations are based on a per entity basis.
And that funding and voting protocol is laid out in the decision memo if you want to refer back to
Some of the decisions where these actions back in the early 2000s were also compartmentalized with the decision memos. So there's a couple dozen decision memos, and they talk about this as well as other things. You can see the flow chart. The one we most often have represented to us, the flow chart from that compliance, the whole thing, each thing would have a compliance. So, but there, like I said, there's a couple dozen of them out there. They're well granted. They went to DEP and EPA. One stuff probably formalized in the 2007 RA that I believe.
And the presentation, which is linked in the agenda that I just gave, if you click on this update decision memo 25, it'll take you to that decision memo.
This is for information. It's a separate allocation. You may not be part of it. One of the deals that we always being not even close to fault, they say, that's the CFAS losses there. Substitute, CFAS coverage. Treating it to water quality is fresh. So it's like way brought up. All these guys, just the frequently so. Yeah, so. I was gonna say they are going to. Yep, and just tell, I remember the kid was at Clark, farm concept.
We've shared all of that information
Robin.
with the Corps during for their deepening, what to do with materials.
Yeah, it's hard to not think that's part of what's happening here. I mean, you could ride some of those waves if you're so inclined. I mean, they're pretty dark days. You know, imagine they're very conducive to the kind of classic condition sea gas likes to have where it's growing.
So section 4 speaks to the point that Jeff just made, that if allocations need to be developed, that would necessitate eval be developed for the Tampa Bay sector. Read it out.
Don't join us at my group and say if your loads are not guaranteed. Stand out and run like this day. Our loads are not guaranteed, so it's very important for us to continue to cooperate to make sure that we don't consider the water across this threshold again. And I and Charles Cobb have crafted the 4Q bylaw such that we would not expose too many people all at once. It's why there's a different facing. But just keep those things in mind when you take this back to who has the authority to authorize the information of this cooperation and potential funding requirements.
Understand the funding because I'm not, my husband's the one that was looking. So the 7,500, that is that would cover the 2027 RI update. I understood. Does it also cover the 2024?
Yes, and we have the initial funding to develop the 2024 reasonable assurance addendum. The consortium funds that are being pledged through this declaration would go towards the development of the 2027 RA update. But as Jeff suggested, we have a low estimate dependent on the work that might be needed on Old Tampa Bay, though.
In that case, maybe the Tampa Bay.
But unless we're going to try to apply that. I'm not sure I see that it's not an absolute need for the rest of the bay. And audience is going forward now.
So we'll be covering that at number 8.
Yeah, that's that sentence.
I ask because then I don't see why we can just go over the 3 items. Once the document is
Finalized with any comments through March 31st.
But she also wants to make sure that you're also including 1 and 2.
Yeah, I was thinking of so she's proposing another. Yeah, it's a motion.
Any other discussion on the floor?
Unless I get a text message here shortly. I can't imagine.
I would confidently, we would be fine with that. I don't know, but like I said, I don't control first grades or then to hear somebody first grades. I go for it to do it right now. Or anybody that on the phone that would like to have some input?
Jeff or Ed, can you hear me? This is Lazan.
Hey, Lazan.
Hey, I apologize for not being able to be there today. I'm not hearing all of the conversation, so I'm not sure whether y'all are moving forward with a vote on those items or not. But I would like to understand them better before we could move forward on them, because I think our relationship in the consortium is a little different in that we don't have allocations that I recall. So.
Yeah, for those entities that don't have specified allocations, the commitment would basically be towards in-kind support of the consortium activities, if any.
And that would not be a problem then. Thank you.
For all of the three items on the screen. Hey,
I'd second.
all those in favor of 1 and 3 as amended by John McGee, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Just raise your hand if you're on the screen.
Any opposed online? This was a motion to move forward on items 1 and 3 as specified on the slide. And for item 3, we would accept comments on the declaration through March 31st, 2023, prior to finalizing.
It passes, take that back to you, whoever will sign for you, or take a look at it. Provide comments by March 30th.
Yep.
Comments by March 30th, people got someone.
So there's perhaps a way we could, that I'm thinking about, that we can move forward in terms of the funding. We might be able to tailor the declaration to say, at a minimum, what was already decided to decision memo 25, but recognize that these new funding recommendations are what we're proposing to move forward on the work, if that will help sort of with your discussions on each of your entities in terms of the funding levels. That will help us start preparing invoicing. And
Yes, we can't go out and procure a technical support contractor if we don't have a funding commitment from the partners. And so we need clarity on the path forward of if you can approve, the 6,000, then should we need to send you an invoice for 6,000, or what is it going to take you to get to a place where we can send you an invoice for 7,500?
Section 7 will tell you once you get your commitments. The section 7 falls out later.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say that should be part of the.
So if we don't receive any comments to the contrary that the $7,500 level is not palatable to entities, then we would consider that the final contribution moving forward after March 31st.
Even if you haven't, it's not signed yet, but you haven't provided comments on the amount, then in April, I can send an invoice for the the new proposed amounts. Just want to make sure everybody kind of.
As long as all the comments are in by March 30th. Then the documents should go in.
Make sure there's consensus around that.
Have an objection. Then that's the part.
Attorney's office will review this and they may, make the decision. But basically, this has to go to the board, and maybe they will say no. So there's no way that you can give us the 7,500 before the board says, after the board says. But that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same case, counts, but that's fine.
Yeah, I understand. I think we would have to probably take it case by case with each of the entities. We would only invoice you when you say it's okay to do so. And whether that's full approval through the board at that point or taking it to the board at the same time. Yes.
Is that requesting that we approve the increase to ask for 75%? Or it's not asking us to approve paying 75% right now, right? So what is exactly that you're asking us? What are the number two?
Yes.
$500 every 5 years for one ton or more. So what we're asking, what we're ready to approve today is it okay for you to ask us for 7,500 versus asking us for the 3,100? Okay, yeah, that I think we can maybe vote on right here. Second. Or goes a motion by you, yeah, it's a motion by me, okay. John, second, okay, all those in favor of whatever John said. All three.
I think that was the difficult part of this debate. But
Talk about the 2022 separate.
So you were provided a hyperlink to the draft 2022 annual compliance assessment that we send to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the US EPA. That information is available for you to review. What we'll be asking for is your consensus approval to formally submit that document to those entities. I'm going to let Marcus give his presentation because everything he's going to present really runs through what we spell out in the annual compliance assessment. So I'll invite him up to give that talk, and then you all can decide whether or not you're comfortable with the draft assessment report as it is, or if you have changes you'd like to request.
Good evening, everybody. So as Maya said, this is in relation to the annual compliance assessment report, as well as the water quality report card that was up available at that desk when you walked in. So Ed kind of covered this already. I just want to, again, remind everybody kind of the recent changes that we've been seeing in the Bay. Hopefully you've seen this graphic a few times now, but it is quite alarming. We've seen continuous declines in seagrasses for the previous 3 reporting periods from the district. So that's definitely not a trend we want to see. And that has happened in, the last 6 years, basically. And if you look at the long-term increase up to 2016, we've lost a quarter of our seagrasses since 2016. And personally, I think it will take quite a long time to get back up to 2016 if we ever get there. So this is sort of your, I guess, your wake-up call to sort of act now and sort of think about the actions that we've discussed today in terms of what this group could do to help get this bay back on track. And I guess further drive home the point, this is a graphic that I put together that I think is just sort of really kind of making these numbers a little more accessible. So on the left, you see each year of seagrass coverage, and you can see it increase up to 2016, and then it just sort of, you know, fades out. So again, not a trend we like to see, in particular the Old Tampa Bay segment and Hillsborough Bay segment. This is where we see a majority of those losses. So you can see both those segments kind of fill out towards 2016 and then kind of shrink towards 2022 to the current levels. Ed kind of showed this graphic as well. These are the 4 major bay segments where you know, we've recorded these changes. The other thing to note is that now in Old Tampa Bay in 2022, this is the lowest recording of seagrasses we've ever had since we've been tracking these things. So we're breaking records here. Not a good record to break, but just bringing that to your attention that these are the numbers as we see them currently. And again, Hillsborough Bay, in terms of percentage losses, this is where we saw a majority of the percentage losses. But in general, there's a lot less seagrass in Hillsborough Bay. So again, the y-axes are different. You know, we're down to about 500, 400 acres in Hillsborough Bay versus, you know, about 4,000 now in Old Tampa Bay. Just to zoom in on Old Tampa Bay, this is the same graphic, but showing the changes over time. You know, this has been an area that's been quite dynamic over the years. In particular, if you look at Feather Sound on the south side, right there, that's where we've seen kind of Haladuli growing and receding over the years. That's kind of our indicator about how good that bay segment's doing. You can see it expand with this graphic and kind of recess towards the current estimate. As we said, the lower bay segments tend to be relatively stable. That includes lower Tampa Bay. These are what make up the remainder of lower Tampa Bay as we describe them in the consortium. So Boca Ciega Bay, Teresilla Bay, and Manatee River. You know, that's just primarily a function of how estuaries work. There's a lot less of stormwater and wastewater inputs in this part of the bay. So seagrasses tend to be relatively stable, but we are obviously monitoring all the bay segments. Thinking about changes in Middle Tampa Bay, we have seen some losses there, as well as Teresilla Bay is also not trending in a good direction, but you know, the numbers are approximately where we would like them to be. So just reiterating the seagrass numbers, you know, we're talking about that a lot now and sort of discussing how we can get certain parts of the bay back on track. That's kind of the bad news, I guess, in terms of what the numbers are looking like for seagrasses, but I want to transition to the water quality report card now. And again, these are all kind of numbers and figures that you'll see in the annual compliance assessment for 2022. But what's kind of interesting about water quality in 2022, you'll notice that this is the first time in a while that all bay segments have been assigned a green category. So sort of stay the course, or in other words, we're meeting our chlorophyll thresholds for all the bay segments. And Old Tampa Bay in particular, this is the one where over the last several years, we've not been in attainment of the criteria for chlorophyll in particular. So 2022 is kind of an anomaly here. You know, we're sort of cautiously optimistic that this trend will continue. But as we know, you know, water quality is variable. It changes year to year with, you know, weather conditions and other sorts of things. So personally, I'm not going to hold my breath that Old Tampa Bay will stay in the green, but at least this is kind of good news for the first year of the next RA period that we're starting. This is the regulatory outcome matrix on the back side of the water quality report card. So this is basically just showing you for each of the major bay segments whether or not the chlorophyll threshold was met for any given year. So here's 2022 down here, all bay segments met the threshold. And you can see, as I was just saying, Old Tampa Bay kind of bouncing around, but for the most part, the last 7 or 8 years, not attaining the threshold. And we do, I haven't been promoting these much lately, but we do have water quality dashboard available to kind of interact with the data a little bit more. You can do kind of a deeper dive and look at, not just chlorophyll trends, but light attenuation trends, trends by individual some water quality stations that go into the segment outcomes. So I encourage you to look at the dashboard if you haven't seen it already. We also like to just show the long-term trends. So this is a graphic, I think, on the first page of the report card. So this is basically just annual chlorophyll averages for each bay segment. And this kind of mirrors the recovery of the bay that we've seen. So chlorophyll declining over time. And I just want to draw your attention to Old Tampa Bay. So you can see for the last 6 years, or last 5 of the 6 years, we exceeded the threshold for chlorophyll. I think in 2018, we were slightly below. So that was the exception year, but for the most part, we've been at or slightly above the threshold. Now in 2022, the concentrations, the annual average for Old Tampa Bay was much lower than both the threshold, so this top line, and our management target, which is the bottom line. And we are not really entirely sure why that's the case. And it kind of gets at these bigger questions of, well, the water quality tends to be quite good. And it's actually, what we describe as a condition that's favorable for seagrass growth. So chlorophyll's low, light attenuation's low, and we think that based on our understanding of water quality, seagrasses should be able to grow there. But there's other questions around, the nutrient diet for Old Tampa Bay. Where are the nutrients going? Are there circulation issues related to the land bridges? Yes, all of these things. So this is part of the problem, and we want to stick to our commitment of nutrient load reductions as our fundamental sort of paradigm for how we manage the bay, but there's obviously other things going on based on the trends we've seen recently with seagrasses. And then this is light attenuation. So basically, is the light environment in the water column able to support seagrass growth? And for the most part, all bay segments are below both the threshold, the top line, and our target, our management target. The only thing I want to point out, actually 2 things I want to point out here is Old Tampa Bay, it's sort of flirting with the upper end of where we would like it to be. So water clarity in Old Tampa Bay is kind of not trending in a great direction, but still, within what we would consider appropriate values for seagrass growth. Lower Tampa Bay is also something that's worth paying attention to. I mean, I deal with trend analysis quite a bit, and if you sort of look at the trend in the last 10 years or even 15 years, it's kind of trending in a direction that is not very positive. The other thing we like to do each year is point out other notable events that happened in Tampa Bay, and so we did have red tide in the bay just for a minute. If you look at lower Tampa Bay in November, what these values show is the red dots are the 2022 monthly averages, or rather the monthly value for the bay segment. And then the black points and the box plots are basically the monthly values for all other years going back to 1975. And so this shows that in November, the chlorophyll concentration for lower Tampa Bay was well above sort of the long-term average or median. And that's because we had Corynea brevis coming into lower Tampa Bay. So something worth noting, obviously not nearly as bad as it was in 2021. That was a huge anomaly in terms of red tide in the bay, but we do like to point these out because we know that red tide can cause issues from time to time in the bay. I just want to talk a few seconds about the trends we saw in 2022 for Old Tampa Bay. Kind of put that into perspective of not just our paradigm for how we manage for seagrasses, but considering factors that are influencing water quality in that bay segment. So obviously our paradigm is based on looking at chlorophyll concentration as an indicator of algal production, and then light attenuation and orienting that towards seagrass growth. So if we reduce nutrient loads, we can improve the water quality to a condition that's favorable for seagrasses. And as I was just saying about red tide, we know that we've seen exceedances of our thresholds and targets for chlorophyll and light attenuation from time to time, from just run-of-the-mill algae blooms, your common diatoms in the bay, to other more harmful species like red tide, Corynea brevis, or in the case of Old Tampa Bay, pyridinium. That's been the nuisance species that's been documented there every year since 2008. So the question is, why in 2022 did we see such low chlorophyll values? Well, we're not really sure, but I just want to remind folks that 2022, at least in terms of the pyrrhodinium blooms, was not entirely different from the previous years. And this is data I got from Carrie. Actually, the concept for this graphic I stole from her entirely. But what this shows is I reproduced, yes. For every day of the year, you can see sort of the temporal progression of the pyrrhodinium blooms and how that varies in space. So the y-axis is latitude. So this is just showing Old Tampa Bay. And just as a reference point, the 3 dotted lines are the approximate locations of the bridges. So Gandy, Howard Franklin, and Courtney Campbell from top to bottom. And so basically this is just showing you that pyrrhodinium tends to bloom, around the middle part of the bay, northwest part of the bay. And it tends to be, most severe around late summer, early fall period. And 2021, quite a lot, but in 2022, it's still there. And to me, when I see a chlorophyll concentration as low as we saw in 2022, that's kind of curious to me. I don't know why that's the case. Perhaps the the sampling that went out maybe missed peak bloom conditions randomly. Who knows? But just to remind everybody, this issue of pyrrhodinium is still there in Old Tampa Bay. Just because we had one good year with the green doesn't mean we can just say Old Tampa Bay is fixed. And I'm not suggesting anyone here is thinking that way, but that's the reminder. And then the last slide I'll show is this is kind of the same thing, but looking at the distribution of the pyrrhodinium concentrations going back to 2011, put in the perspective of the whether or not the chlorophyll threshold was attained or exceeded in that given year. So the reds and greens you see on the report card, these are the same value or the same colors for Old Tampa Bay. So again, Old Tampa Bay has had issues. It's been in the red the last 7 years except for 2018. 2022, we had the green. But if you look at, these points are the median concentrations for the pyrrhodinium cells in a given year. And if you look at the median here, yeah, it's slightly below the last couple of years. But there's other years, 2015, 16, 17, where the median was below the grand mean. That's this solid line. And we still exceeded the threshold for chlorophyll. So pyrrhodinium is part of the problem, and it's also still there. But there's other things at play that we've been talking about, other nutrient cycling concerns, getting a better understanding of kind of the assimilative capacity of Old Tampa Bay and how we can sort of address that as a group moving forward. So I kind of said all these bullet points already, but again, I'm not going to hold my breath that 2022 is going to maintain in the green for Old Tampa Bay. We're hopeful that it will trend in a positive direction, but because of all these other issues with, the recurring pyrrhodinium blooms, the circulation issues, changing water temperatures as a function of climate change, these are all things we know that are going to continue to and have already affected the ecology of Old Tampa Bay. The seagrass decline is obviously front and center with everybody. This is, not a trend we want to see bay wide. And, as I was saying earlier, we want to stick to our fundamental paradigm of nutrient load reductions, or sort of setting those allocations and sticking to those. We know that works, but there's other management actions we can consider. And again, Carrie is going to talk about some of those. But there's things we could do now. We're talking about recommitting to the NMC and putting out RFPs. That's all work that needs to be done. But this is, I think, our warning call for how the Bay is doing. Hopefully there's time to reverse it, but if it continues on this trend, to less and less seagrasses, we might reach a point where it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get it back to the condition we would like it to be. So that's all I'll say, but thank you.
Any questions for Marcus?
So the good news is, for the first year of the 2027 RA assessment period, we are in the green for all bay segments. But that doesn't mean that all of this work that we, that we need to do based on what we experienced over the prior RA assessment doesn't still need to happen. And I think Mark has kind of laid out the case why we need to keep on that path as well. So what I'm looking for is, your consensus approval to submit this annual compliance assessment report to FDEP. If you have any changes, please let me know. Otherwise, I'd be happy to submit this on your behalf.
Say aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Very low pass, FWC, but find that very actionable science research.
Thank you. So yes, I'm going to talk about this draft research and application plan that is a product of this actionable science planning grant that we received from the NOAA Restore program, and that we've discussed in prior meetings with you. So just a reminder, this planning grant was to address research needs for improving management of pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay. And so I'm going to get to the plan, but I just wanted to review a little bit about some of the challenges that have been mentioned before already today. But some of the challenges with pyridinium that make it especially complicated are shown here in this first panel here, where we see its life cycle. And so it produces a resting cyst as part of its life cycle. And those resting cysts act like seeds, and they fall to the seafloor there are abundant resting cysts in the sediments of Old Tampa Bay. So those cysts then seed the future blooms the next year. And so we have this influx of cells already, that's ready to go every spring. Pyridinium is also a vertical migrator, so it can migrate in the water column for better access to resources. This also is important because it influences its transport, so that influences the accumulation. And as we've already heard today, the most intensive blooms occur north of the Howard Franklin Bridge. As you can see in this middle panel, just an interpolation of 10 years of data, the darkest red showing those highest concentration areas. And so we see those problems, that problem reflected in the missed water quality targets and the seagrass losses that Marcus talked about in that area. Okay, so this project was about adding tools to the toolbox with the idea that the cellular growth processes and the cellular loss processes for pyridinium in Old Tampa Bay are way out of balance. And so we acknowledge that it's important to continue to, as Marcus mentioned, it's important to continue to reduce nitrogen loads, because reduced nitrogen is going to reduce algal growth rates. Lower algal growth rates reduces accumulation, but we also need to address the other side of the equation, and that's what this project was about, looking at mechanisms of loss, of cellular loss. And so initially we were focused on two aspects, or two mechanisms to reduce or to enhance cellular loss in Old Tampa Bay. Bivalve grazing through shellfish restoration was one focus, and the other was to enhance circulation in Old Tampa Bay to reduce accumulation of biomass. And so through the co-reduction process, so this is table 1 in the research and application plan, which is linked on the agenda. We had several meetings with you all and others over the past year and a half, where we refined the focus. And so notably here, last June, we met with the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, and we decided to refine the focus for this particular research and application plan so that we could develop a more detailed plan and address those research needs, and also acknowledging that the other aspects are being addressed through other avenues. So this research and application plan is focused on examining the potential benefits of causeway alterations aimed at increasing circulation and physical transport to reduce pyridinium accumulation. And then our research objectives are laid out here. Briefly, the first research objective is to identify the optimal number and configuration of causeway alterations. The second objective is to take these scenarios once they're identified and to simulate the positive or negative ecosystem effects for Tampa Bay. And then finally, to co-develop some success criteria for future causeway alterations to overcome some of those implementation barriers that are in place now. Okay, and so just also to note that we partnered with TBEP, USF, and FDOT to submit a proposal based on this research plan, and we submitted that to the NOAA Restore Actionable Science Research Call for Proposals. We submitted that in December.
That would bring additional resources.
Yes, that would, if that gets funded, that would bring additional resources. So what we have laid out in this plan is very similar to what we proposed in that proposal. And so just this is to orient you to the research and application plan. This is just the table of contents. The chapter 1 is kind of, the rationale, kind of what I just talked about, but in more detail, the rationale, the background, and then also going over the process that we went through to develop our focus. Chapter 2 is laying out our research priorities and the research needs, and reviewing the tools that we have to address those. And that's organized by our monitoring programs, and then our research for the pyridinium directed research that's directly related to the research objectives, both what is ongoing, but what is also needed. And then also the third part of that is the model applications in Old Tampa Bay that are already happening or that need to happen. And then finally, the data sharing and data management aspect. And then chapter 3 really gets into the research activities, gets into the detail of what we're going to do, how the research is going to be implemented, what the products are going to be, and how those are going to be transferred. And so this is just to show you kind of what's in chapter 3. Okay, so we have our table 3 in chapter 3 outlines all of our research activities, as well as our co-production meetings and our implementation activities, to kind of give you the timeline for which we're expecting those to happen. And then we have each of our research activities. We focus on 5 research activities, and they're highlighted in boxes. And in those boxes, we have semi-detailed explanation of how we'll do that research, as well as what we expect the products to be, who will be involved, and what we expect the funding needed to carry that research out. And so one more thing I want to do is just to kind of go over each of the research activities so you know what's in there. Okay, so the first research activity I mentioned, the first objective is to identify the optimal causeway cut-through configurations. And so for those of you that were at the Old Tampa Bay Working Group meeting last June, Steve Myers presented this novel approach using a genetic algorithm to identify near optimal solutions for causeway cut-throughs. It is a genetic algorithm just because it's based on it's called that because it's based on population dynamics. So this is just a diagram that shows the different steps. It's based on a fitness score. In this case, it would be the retention properties of particles, because we're concerned about residence time. And then you go through these series of algorithms that Steve could explain. And that's how you come up with your optimal solution. So this is a prototype that Steve developed. And so we have our first research activity to further develop that And then those near optimal solutions will then feed into research activity 4, where they're being evaluated using the Old Tampa Bay integrated model. Okay, and so research activity 2 is relating back to pirate Indians' ability to vertically migrate. Right now, it's modeled as a passive particle, but it actually migrates in response to light. And so this top panel is just showing its vertical migration. The larger circles are more cells over the course of a 30-hour period. And you can see that the pattern is not necessarily only driven by light. And so what we would like to do so that we can actually model, better model its transport, is to calculate swimming speeds and patterns of migration, so the factors that are driving the migration. And then that will feed into, so this is USF and FWRI. So USF's part will be to develop a vertical swim component for the Old Tampa Bay integrated model, using what we find in our laboratory experiments on swimming speeds, and then get better estimates for retention and accumulation that way. Research activity 3 is FWRI, and that is quantifying physiological parameters that are needed for the Old Tampa Bay integrated model. We have some parameters that we've defined, but these plots show various growth rates based on literature values for half saturation uptake of nitrogen, for example. And so we would like to do experiments where we define this for pyridinium, so we have a better estimate of growth rates in response to the nitrogen in the bay. And then those parameters will be integrated into the models. Okay, research activity 4 will be what I talked about, the evaluation of the scenarios, kind of everything that I've talked about feeding into this. And then this will be Janicki Environmental, TBEP as the lead, and taking a similar approach as has been done before in Ed's paper, the 2016 paper, where they developed a baseline, and then Ed can probably explain this better than me, but for each key ecological attribute that will be, defined through this co-production process, develop a net environmental benefit score for that. And then taking those net environmental benefit scores for all the attributes and combining them for the different action scenarios. And so these, there are a set of ecological attributes that we have laid out in the report, but this is something that we'll be defining as we go along with you all. And then finally, developing the success criteria for the future causeway alterations, so that what we learn from this project can actually be used and will be used by partners. And so this is something that right now is not very defined, but it will be something that we'll have to, through this 3-year project, work on, so that we can make sure that our products are being developed into something that's useful and transferable. And that's it for the research. And I just want to end by saying that, again, this is, as you can see, we have this timeline, we have multiple opportunities, over the next 3 years as we're doing this work that we want to get input and to, modify and refine. But right now, what we would like is your input on this research plan. And as you're reviewing it, I just would like you to think about, we would welcome any type of feedback, but we would really like to know, as you're looking at the research activities, are there important components missing or considerations that we need to include now? Are there additional partners that we should reach out to? And then, are there other avenues that we haven't identified for implementation that that you may know of that we can add? And if you could provide comments by March 17th, that would be great. You could, as Ed showed with the other document, you could comment directly in the Google Doc, or you can email comments and suggestions to me. So And if you have any questions now, I can take those and either I can try to answer them, or maybe our other project team members can try.
Anybody have a question for Carrie?
To reinforce what Gary's saying, this is hopefully building the toolbox to address some of the questions we have that still remain in Old Tampa Bay, in particular, some of the tools that we have to understand hydrogen, model hydrogen moving in the future. We know that the current tools are doing a good job, so these additional research items will help us develop that better toolbox to understand what needs to be done to reduce hydrogen movement in the future.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think our last presenter, Ocean Conservancy, is online.
Hi, we are here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So do you all have a hard stop at 3:30? I'm having a hard time hearing folks at the table.
So Chris, should I make you the presenter? That's
Whatever's easiest. You can advance for me if you're there and don't mind doing that.
It's much easier if you are able to do it, to share your screen. Should I do it, you or Cassidy?
You can do mine. Let me.
Can everyone hear me as well?
Okay. So which display are you all seeing? Are you seeing the presentation mode?
Not seeing anything.
No, not yet.
Okay, hold on. Let me
Chris,
do
can you
this.
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Cassidy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let me do this. Hold on a second. I'm trying to share my screen as I'm looking at it.
All right, if you can't get it up, I can do it. I'll stand up here.
Hold on a second. Is that,
Oh, there you-
is that better?
Yeah, now can you go into presentation mode? Perfect.
You see presentation mode?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so hey everyone. My name is Chris Robbins. I'm Associate Director of Science at Ocean Conservancy, and Cassidy Troxell is also joining me. She's a PhD student at Florida International University. And we want to talk today about a sort of innovative nitrogen fingerprinting project that we are implementing in Tampa Bay. So first of all, Ocean Conservancy is an international ocean conservation organization, and we work on a variety of issues, including the Arctic, sea level rise, ocean acidification, fisheries, shipping, and we kind of work at the nexus of policy and science, working to protect the oceans and and all the challenges that the oceans face, globally. And this is also the case in Florida. In Florida, we are working on a variety of issues, including ocean trash and plastics and water quality, and the drivers behind poor water quality, such as nutrient pollution, marine wildlife, also carbon pollution in the context of coastal resilience and sea level rise. And of course, we place a premium on education and outreach to ensure that Floridians are aware of these issues, that these issues are, these are nonpartisan issues, bipartisan issues that affect everyone in various quarters of the state. So we've all seen various iterations of this particular map. Excess nutrients are driving harmful algal blooms. Of course, red tide is a natural phenomenon that occurs naturally offshore, but as it moves closer to shore, can be fueled by, exacerbated by nitrogen. Of course, there are There are algal blooms here that aren't even mentioned, like pyridinium, that are linked to light attenuation and, of course, seagrass losses. So really what we want to do is help to um, reduce the amount of nitrogen further that's in the system. Tampa Bay has made an amazing recovery ecologically over the last few decades, and in large part thanks to the efforts of groups like yours, the Nitrogen Management Consortium and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. But what we really want to do is, and we were talking amongst ourselves a couple years ago about the kinds of science that we could bring to bear on Tampa Bay in terms of helping us really at a finer geographic scale, and in terms of land uses, identify where more precisely the nitrogen is originating. And so at the same time, I was also looking at a BMAP monitoring report that DEP submitted to the state legislature. And in that report, they talked about or recommended the use of chemical tracers in differentiating between nitrogen from human and livestock sources. And so this kind of triggered a light bulb in us that we could potentially, use this kind of innovative fingerprinting science to help understand and better sort of differentiate the sources of nitrogen in the system, and then provide that information to natural resource managers like yourselves and officials to further reduce nitrogen loads. So we propose this idea to a group of concerned private citizens who want to get involved and actually do something to further improve, Tampa Bay ecosystem recovery and reduce nitrogen. And so we pitched this idea, this nutrient fingerprinting project, to this group about a year ago, and they tentatively endorsed it, but they wanted us to come back with a full plan for it. So earlier, or I would say late last year, we convened 12 leading experts in the fields of nutrient dynamics, chemical markers, and ecosystem processes to help us kind of build out this proposed body of work. And so at the end of that workshop, we arrived and had sort of a scope of work that we have since put in a proposal that the group of concerned private citizens, business representatives are helping us secure support. So I think I'm going to turn the presentation to Cassidy, who will talk more specifically about what we are trying to do, the time frame, etc. So Cassidy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so it's no secret really what the sources of, oh, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's no secret really what the sources of nitrogen, is in the environment, and a lot of these sources are well defined. A lot of point sources, some non-point sources like atmospheric deposition and whatnot, but there is still a big gap in non-point sources. So that is really the focus of this fingerprinting, is the non-point sources, and defining those to a further extent than what is currently available. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the concept of nitrogen fingerprinting. So just like each one of us has a unique fingerprint, so do nitrogen sources. So we've already identified the sources that we're going to tackle. We're going to, define the point source as well as redefine the non-point source, such as stormwater runoff, lawn runoff, agricultural runoff. And our idea is to apply a set of analytical techniques that will give us the granularity needed to separate out these sources and understand their loads. We're going to use those fingerprints and do the source apportioning based on some statistical modeling and get down to those loads. You can go ahead to the next slide. So the expert panelists that now are a majority of advisors in this project, we came up with 4 different types of analytical approaches that help cover, the gaps that make it difficult to separate out these sources and define them. We've come up with using fluorescence spectroscopy, the basic nutrient analysis suite, some isotopic analysis, and also using high resolution mass spec to do some tracers. Go ahead to the next slide. And we have chosen the Hillsborough River for this study because this river particularly gives us a lot of sources that we can fingerprint, as well as it is an impaired body. Our goal, though, is to have this technique to be transferable to other, parts in Florida and maybe, other parts of the nation. So, next slide. And these are just a list of our collaborators and co-PIs for the project advisors. We have a big list of contributors from all over the country and informal advisors as well. And yep, next slide.
So that's it. And Maya, we're happy to take questions now or, after the fact, but we'll defer to you on what is appropriate because I know we're at time or over time.
Yeah, I was trying to stay on time. Sorry for rushing a little bit.
Are there any questions from the room? Comments? I'm not seeing any. Thanks for sharing, y'all.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring this to your all's attention. And if the Nitrogen Management Consortium, would like to sort of support this body of work in principle, we would love to have that support, and obviously can talk with individuals, after the fact too.
So the city of Tampa is wondering what the timeline for this project is.
The timeline is 2 years. So we are going to begin sampling here in the next month, and so we will then go out to 2 years.
Okay.
Agenda. Maya has proposed May 10th as the next meeting. That would also be on Wednesday, in person.
I'll have to check.
Okay. Oh, if there's any connections to that, Maya know that. During the meeting.